Hello again. I feel it's been quite a long day already, but who's having a good time? Yes. I can't hear you, but nice. Bring back the panto. No, this is obviously, I think every talk people are looking forward to, but we're very privileged to have three very talented artists with us today to talk about their work for fighting fantasy and beyond. So I'd just like to introduce Alan Langford, Duncan Smith, and Tony Hoff. Tony's very kindly doing MC duties on this one, so he will now, I'll pass over to him, and then I'll probably pop back in later to run around with the microphone for Q&A.
It's working.
We can hear you.
Okay, hello folks, and welcome to our artist talk. None of us have rehearsed any of this, so if we get a bit lost along the way, just shout at us and we'll sort it out. Right, so we're going to start with Alan, and we're just going to go through how we got involved in fighting fantasy in the first place, and where we were coming from, and how it came about, and then just go through which books we did and what we're doing now. So start with you, Alan. See if the slides work.
Fine, Tony.
do you want to advance this? Oh, you've done it. Yeah.
Is it working?
It's working and the slides are on.
Fine. Oh, great. Well, basically. First 10 years of my working life, I did any job I could in the UK. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Anyway, I always wanted to be an artist, so I started doing evening classes and studied, and I went for a heck of a lot of interviews, and I eventually got jobs as an illustrator working in Alresford in Hampshire, doing sort of line drawings for laminated plaques that were very popular. You probably remember in the 1980s, late 70s, late 1980s. But it was a temporary thing. It was a fad. And eventually it went out of fashion, and we were busy looking for something else to do with our artistic talents. So I contacted a Fleet Street artist agency called Artright Artists, run by a guy called Mike Fowler. And his sort of partner was Ken Houghton. Do any of you remember Ken Houghton's work? Worked for the girls' comics. Cindy, Vinty, any arms up? No, nobody? You're too young. Anyway,
Can everyone hear properly? Oh, you're going to need to hold the microphone.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Sorry, I'm not a rock star.
Yes, you are.
Yet. Yeah. Anyway, Ken Houghton and Mike Fowler were basically my agents, and they used to travel up to Scotland to DC Thompson and look for work up there. And they found me work illustrating in a comic called Warlord. And two different stories at different times. One was Pawnee Patrol, which is the idea of a bunch of Pawnee Indians conscripted from a reservation to fight in Burma in World War II. And a combination of circumstances led them to start reverting to the battle tactics of their ancestors, and fought the Japanese military of the 1940s with bows and arrows and war paint and stolen ponies. And it was fun to draw, but I couldn't be blamed for the scripts, put it that way. The other one was Convict Commandos. But I could go on. So that was basically about two cons who joined the Royal Marines through nefarious means and end up in all sorts of strange and odd situations. But after that, I did some work for 2000 AD, Future Shocks, that kind of thing. And I liked it. I liked IPC magazines. The frames were broader, and so there was more room for captions and speech balloons and this kind of thing. Am I speaking okay? Is it coming through all right? Thank you. Anyway, after doing quite a bit of that, the British comic industry started to go in decline. So I was wondering if I was Jonah. But it was the same for all the illustrators and comic script writers at that time, with the exception of people like Al Moore and what's his name, Grant, who did Dread and so on. And I had to look for work elsewhere. And Mike found me work doing the first one was the Island of the Lizard King. And, you know, I thoroughly enjoyed doing it. I used the same techniques initially that I used in doing comic. And back then it was brush and ink, and monotone reproduced very, very cheaply. It was a cheap way of doing things, but you could still produce interesting artwork. And, you know, I carried on with that. And they were quite pleased with the job, and they gave me a number of others to do. And I was very grateful for it, because at that time, comic illustration was unless you were in the top, very much the top, and available all the time, you're a bit stumped for work. But I had another passion, and that's painting from life. A friend of mine, successful landscape painter, told me to come out and try my luck painting landscapes, and I don't live very far from the New Forest, so we went out there painting. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. And, but it's a tough living, being an artist and you know, living on your paintings. Only just, yeah. So I did that, and I particularly like horses. I love painting horses. And in the forest, of course, we got our New Forest ponies. But as a child, I spent some time in the company of Romany gypsies, the young kids. And they introduced me to a lot of, well, their nefarious doings and so on. But the horse fairs, if you get a chance to visit a Romany horse fair, mainly Appleby up in Cumbria, it's a hell of an experience. And these horses, for the most part, are beautifully kept. There are bad stories about the way gypsies treat their horses, but in the main, they look after them. They're important to them. They're a measure of pride to them. They love their animals, and they ride them bareback into the river. I recently was at an event in the forest at Danny Cooper's Drive, which is like a miniature Appleby Fair. And, well, I could tell you a lot more about horses than I can about comic working in black and white for fighting fantasy. But going back to fighting fantasy, it's a unique idea. It's encouraged a heck of a lot of young people who are adverse to reading to actually take up reading. And when it first came out, there was some opposition from church groups that it wasn't doing kids a heck of a lot of good. They were sort of complaining about the demons and the witches and that aspect of it. It was only a minority, not all church groups were opposed to them. But in retrospect, and well, even at the time, people like Steve and Ian argued that it was encouraging children to read, and it did.
The same thing happened in America with Dungeons and Dragons, where people said, oh, it was summoning demons and stuff, and people were having hallucinations. And it was all rubbish.
Yeah, you're right. And the Beatles. They were nearly burned on a cross. Oh, dear. Well, is there anything more you'd like me to say, Tony?
Well, that covers it for the minute. We'll come back, obviously. What we're going to do is, after we've each had our little turn and told you about how we come into this, we'll have a bit of a round-robin discussion, and we'll take audience questions and then waffle on at length about them. So, so we'll come back. We'll come back to each of us in turn. But let's move on. Have you shown all your slides, by the way?
Oh, sorry.
You should click through your slides.
Yeah, I just showed this.
And maybe just
this is Island of the Lizard King.
Tell people what they are.
This is the first one I illustrated. I didn't do the colouring. That came much later with I think, the digital sort of revolution. I think I'm not sure which that one's from. But
now we've got to remember what all the pictures were.
Steve told me, he said, I know you like doing horses, so he said he'd give me a horse type thing to draw. Well, I tried making this creature look horse-like, and it didn't work. I tried doing it dog-like, and that actually did work. So I decided to do that. The one on the left is the creature of havoc, and these you are the person playing the story, as some of you may know, is the monster. So you're playing the part of the monster, and the cowering dwarf and the rats are because of your approach in the form of the shadow going towards them. Portal of Evil, I think. I enjoyed doing that because, well, particularly the drawing on the left reminded me of the scene in Lord of the Rings with the Nazgul and so on. Crikey.
Right, what was this worm? What was this worm all about? Come on.
I've forgotten what the worm was for. Dear. I wouldn't want to meet it. Let's get on to the cover on the right is the only cover I ever did for Puffin of the Fighting Fantasy series. They told me they liked it a heck of a lot, but they never gave me another cover to illustrate. So I'm a little bit sort of worried about that. But anyway, let's move on a bit. That's my most recent piece of work I've had done commercially, and that was for, what they call it, Eagle Times, of course. And that was Captain Condor, that I'd never heard of before. And apparently it was, what's the name of the magazine? It was a sort of takeoff of Dan Dare in another comic. So, that's how that came about. The illustration on the left is from a story I made up during the pandemic. It's called the Star Drake of Dumnonia. It's only a 12-page little yarn, and it's it's the idea of something being washed up in a storm during I think about the 10th or 11th century, and it's lying on the coast. And if you want to know more about it, you should buy the magazine. It's in, it's in Shift. It's in Shift.
Available at Alan's table.
Pardon?
Available at your table.
Oh, well, it isn't because I've only got one copy. You have to contact Shift Magazine.
Available at Alan's table.
And they do this.
If anyone wants a copy, Alan will hand draw you one. It won't take very long.
Well, let's get away quick. I'm not taking.
Duncan, right, so we'll move on to Duncan
the other man
Smith.
now. We're definitely on the other man. So I've gone through my selection.
Thanks, Alan. Right, okay, so Duncan, tell us all about it.
Well, I moved down to London after art school. Went to Glasgow School of Art, looking for working things. There was more work in London at the time, and a couple of my friends had moved down. One of the friends was Ian McCaig. Moved down. I moved down to Flatshire. And Ian was working on the Fighting Fantasy at the time. I was dragging my folio around all the publishers, trying to get work and everything like that. And until you get something published, nobody really trusts you until they realise you can meet a deadline, and you can get it on time, and it's a good piece of work. So people, as soon as they see that, you'd get more work from publishers. Ian was working on the fantasy books, and they said he was looking for another artist, so he recommended me. So I just went along to Puffin, and they liked my portfolio and said, yeah, let's do that. So that's how I got started with, I think it was Scorpion Swamp first I did. So we had, the sort of deadline for these books were really tight. I think it was like a month or something I had for them.
Yeah, it was pretty much a month. So it's one picture a day, wasn't
it? That's right. And you had to really crack on with it. So you couldn't kind of go, oh, that's quite nice. Or, no, I need to move that. You just had to think, right, that's going to work, that's not going to work. You didn't have a lot of input from the publishers. You just had things like, it's a dark room and there's somebody in the dark room. So figure that one out for yourself, So, or sometimes it would be, it's a dark room, don't put anything, and I'd go, can I put something? No, don't put anything else in it, it's just got to look like that. But no, it's boring, but yeah, that's it. So we used to do those, and it was great fun to do. Ian was working on his, I was working on mine, and we always needed people to pose for us, so we ended up posing for each other, in different costumes and different poses and things like that. So we have all these photographs of each of us, which we would never show to anyone because they're embarrassing, in different forms of attire and everything, and we've sworn that no one ever sees those photographs. So, but that was a good time, and it was good to have a tight deadline like that to get things done, because you found that you did things much quicker. You didn't have time to mess around. So with the cover for Scorpion Swamp, all I was given was it's a swamp monster. We don't want it to look like any other monsters, and it has lots of legs and make them look scary. So that's what I did. I just started giving something like lots of teeth and lots of limbs coming out with fingernails in them and everything. And it seemed to work okay, and try to make it not too scary, because we were talking about the books being too scary for kids and things, and you know, like you were saying about, you know, the negative stuff about them. So they loved that, so I just went with that. And then all the insides. Again, with the insides, you had the bare minimum of what you had to do. It was like, you know, read the panel of what's happening here, and then pick something that's going to really stand out. So it was just a matter of looking through it all and going, right, that'll make a good image. You know, I can make that look good, even if it was a smaller part of the story, because sometimes the main part of the story just, you know, the image wouldn't work. So I'd go to something that would coming in later on or something. And again, you know, I'd get people to pose for me, you know, and now and again you'll see Ian pop up, but you probably wouldn't recognize him now in different things. But it was really good. It was really good fun to do. And then when I finished that, they were really happy with it. Then they asked me to do the Fighting Fantasy one, which was, I thought, oh, brilliant, it's great chance to draw new monsters and, you know, people in armor and dwarfs and things. And it was rooms. I had to draw rooms.
Do we want to advance the slide?
Yeah, I can do that. Oh, you've got it here? Okay. So, this is one of the other ones, the ones where I actually got to draw monsters. So you had, you know, I tried to make them quite different, quite stark and a wee bit scary, but not too scary. So these are just ones I'd get Ian to pose for with a big sheet one. And it looks scary. And the same with the other one, and I'd work from that and make it up from there. So they were quite good, quite fun to do. This was one of the rooms that I had to do, which I was allowed to, you know, do things a wee bit more about it because there was a treasure chest and everything. So I just put lights in and stuff and tried to make it more appealing and things, and, you know, kind of mysterious. And this is the cover, Fighting Fantasy. They wanted a monster popping out. And they wanted a connection between the dice, you know, and the playing of the role-playing style of it and everything. So I came up with this idea of the monster coming out and popping out. I was going to have a dragon flying out of it, but they said, no more dragons just now. But I managed to put a wee dragon in the background there, popping out of one of the numbers. And I just tried to get everything kind of exploding to create a kind of more interesting book cover. But that went well. It was really good fun to do. Quite different from the Scorpion Swamp one. Again, all the black and white. So we're good ones to do. Sometimes you get really good fun, you know, with the mermaid sitting on the rock and everything, waiting for what was going to happen next. And the guy with the beard that takes up the entire table. There were two versions of this. I did a close-up version with this brilliant beard and all the birds hiding inside of it and everything. And they said, yeah, that's great, but we can't see the room. We need to see the room. Oh, okay. So I did it again. That's the room you see. So I just put some shadows in and tried to make it a bit more dynamic and things. So it was quite good fun. And we're now back to yourself.
Right, okay then. Well, hello everyone.
Do you want me to finish off with what I'm doing now and everything?
Oh, yeah. Please tell people what you're doing now.
So I'm still, just now I've just been doing some work for a French publisher, Septerium, I think it's called, and doing some more of these types of drawings. But most of my work now is varied from working in comics to doing some concept work for films, book covers and magazine illustrations and things. Do a lot of portrait work and things as well. So it's quite varied, but you know, it's good fun coming back to something like this as well. It was a really nice, fun thing to do for that short period of time and everything, you know. So as I was saying to everyone else, coming to this, the first time I came to this was a few years ago before the pandemic. And I've never been to a convention before, and it was lovely to hear everyone's stories about, you know, how these books, you know, either inspired or made them want to go to do some drawing or wanted to, you know, have more of a purpose in life and stuff. And it was lovely to hear all these stories, and I was quite, you know, overwhelmed by people saying, "Oh, you inspired me to go and draw," and things like that. Because I would be, well, we all are stuck in little rooms drawing away for deadlines and then going on to the next job and not really thinking about someone sitting reading this. So to hear all these stories for me was just like fantastic. It was just amazing, you know. So that's it really. I mean, I'm still drawing away and still doing paintings and all sorts of different stuff now, doing commissions and things and stuff as well. So that's me.
Right, well, hello. Back to me again. Yeah, now, I became aware of the existence of role-playing games and tabletop war games after I'd found a copy of The Warlock of Firetop Mountain, round about 1982. And it was like, wow, I'd always wanted to be an artist. I thought I'd go into comics and hopefully one day, do book covers and album covers and film work and stuff like that. But then I've discovered this role-playing game world, and a lot of the illustrations for a lot of the really early role-playing games were pretty shit. So I thought, well, I could stand a much more of a chance of getting into that industry because, I'm not that bad. And so of course I bombarded various people with samples, including puffin books. And eventually, my bombarding of Games Workshop worked. And sort of round about 86, I got a call to do some stuff for Warhammer 40,000, which was a new sort of sci-fi space game that no one had heard of that turned out quite well in the end. And of course, I carried on looking for other work, other avenues, and I met a lot of the artists at conventions like the Games Day or British Fantasy Con, and a lot of them were doing fighting fantasy stuff. And I thought, oh yeah, that again. Yeah. So again, more samples flurried towards puffin, and then lo and behold, suddenly I got a call saying, "Okay, do you want to send us a sample?" And so they sent me a brief that was from Dead of Night, and I thought, well, my mate Martin illustrated that, so all I've got to do is look at the picture he did and do a better one. So I did a picture, and it was good enough, and I sent it to them, and they said, okay, we've got this one coming up, Spectral Stalkers, needs the interiors doing. It was my friend Ian Miller that did the cover, and I think as a much better, well-established illustrator, he probably just didn't want to do the interiors because they didn't pay very well. And he might have even tipped the nod to ask me to do it. I don't know. If he did, I'm very, very grateful because it did start me off. It was a very difficult time in the sort of late 80s, early 90s. We were starting to get a bit of a horrible recession, weren't we? And as you say, the comics industry was weird and couldn't get into that much. So it was a really good time to actually start doing a game book. So the first one I got to do was Spectral Stalkers. Is there a slide? Let's have a look. Hang on. Can you go back one? We're just having a technical problem here because it's jumping. Yeah, next one. All right, so that's gone on to Night Dragon. So there obviously isn't a picture from Spectral Stalkers. So I'll talk about Night Dragon. Anyway, it comes to the 10th anniversary of the start of Fighting Fantasy. And having already done Spectral Stalkers, but not the cover, I was a bit peeved because I like to do colour work, and I really wanted to get a book cover under my belt. So, of course, I went to the 10-year celebration armed with a portfolio with some of my paintings in, and I waited until we'd had a few sherries before collaring the art director and saying, look, I can do covers, I can do cover art, look, here's my samples, have another sherry, and please say that you'll get me to do the cover for the next one. And he got drunk and shook my hand, and then he couldn't go back on it. So hence we got this cover for Night Dragon. I wasn't very good. Wasn't very confident in acrylics at the time, so I plumped for gouache and inks, which I know some of the other artists here use. But it was quite unusual. Most of the cover artists for this line were acrylic. But it came out good enough. My first ever book cover commission: a black dragon in a pitch dark cave. Yeah, sounds easy. Yeah. But there was a little bit of toing and froing, adding bits of sort of lit mist and stuff to make it pop. But we got there in the end. Anyway, so I was very pleased with myself for that. At that time, finances got really, really bad, and I actually started to. I fell out of Games Workshop and started to really struggle. But I still had time to fit in the occasional fighting fantasy. Can you flip the next? So then, of course, along comes this bad boy, and this was my first opportunity to work with Jonathan Green. An author with whom I've had quite a lot of conspiring with over the past several years. But by now I was okay with acrylics, so I did this acrylics cover. We messed around with a couple of ideas. At first it was going to be the main bad guy sitting on top of his flying horse thingamy. But we worked out that that would make a lousy cover design because the wings would come off the page, or you'd have a tiny little creature in the middle of some great big wings. So eventually we plumped for this design, which is kind of like very similar to one that appeared in one of the Star Wars films, actually. I must have a word with someone about that. But actually, the main inspiration for the actual technique that I used was a guy called Richard Corbin, who I later found out did all the covers for the American editions of the Fighting Fantasies. He was one of my favourite artists from comics, because like Alan and I think Duncan, my background, my inspiration was comic art. 2000 AD. I don't know if anyone remembers a comic called House of Hammer magazine that featured comic strip versions of Hammer films. And they had, the artwork in those was really crisp, clean, beautiful work. And that was what I kind of aspired towards. Right, okay, so should we flip to the next one? Right, yeah. So, many, many years later, I had been out of illustration for a very long period of time. As I say, the recession was really bad in the 90s. It got worse. All my contacts dried up. And on top of all that, I started a family. So for about 6 or 7 years, I just basically, I stopped doing artwork and worked in a factory. And, I used to occasionally bring pictures that I'd done and show my work colleagues, and they'd look at my pictures and go, "What the bloody hell are you doing here?" But at the time, I could literally make more money sweeping a floor in a factory than I could make doing my artwork. But then, obviously, the situation changed. I got made redundant from this factory, and then all of a sudden, I had a phone call. I hadn't heard from anyone for 7, 8 years. I suddenly had a phone call. "Do you want to do another fighting fantasy game book?" And I was like, "Do I?" And then I was like, "Oh, and how much would it be?" And I was expecting it to be about 1,000, like the last one was. And he goes, "Oh, 3,000, all right." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I suppose that will do." So I was back in the game, and it was, it kind of cheered me up. I was like, "Yeah, I'm an artist again." So then, obviously, it was the next thing was to try and re-establish my name, re-establish my contacts. And as luck would have it, we got this thing called the internet, which had magically popped up in the meantime. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's quite popular in that London and stuff. And suddenly there were things like Kickstarters, and suddenly young people that weren't geeks were playing Dungeons and Dragons, and suddenly because of the open game license, suddenly there were thousands and thousands of role-playing games and like loads and loads of things going on. So gradually over the past sort of several years, I've managed to claw myself back into doing this full time. So and that obviously one of the big things that helped there was John, because we've done a number of projects together since then, including an image for Shakespeare versus Cthulhu, which I don't know if any of you have got, but it's very, very good. And of course Blood Bones, and of course 'Twas the role-playing game before Christmas, which is another thing that really played towards my kind of me and John have got a kind of similar sort of sense of the bizarre, a similar sort of sense of what's something that can be both funny and weird and scary and all that. So I'm looking forward to a lot more work of that nature, me and John. And I'm doing other stuff for various other role-playing games as well. I literally, quite recently, did a fully armoured battle corgi for this is a corgi dog in full medieval plate armour, which is for a role-playing game supplement that's linked to Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. So yeah, so what I'm doing now is that. I'm trying to sort of basically go in that direction. But of course, if any more game books come my way, you know, I'm keen to do them. And yeah, there's an illustration from Twas on the left-hand side, which is purely digital. You'll note that there's a Dalek in the bottom left-hand corner amongst the pile of toys. That's from the first Dalek movie, if there are any Dalek geeks here. But yeah, very specifically. And yeah, on the right you can see one of the images I did for this is Grim Creations, which is this 5th edition supplement. And that is Fenrir, the sort of wolf of Ragnarok, chained to a rock and about to break free and destroy the world. Right, and I think that's the last one, isn't it? There. Right, so folks, I want to open up the floor now. So has anybody got any questions that they want to ask any of the panel?
Who are your favourite artists?
Sorry?
Who are your favourite artists?
My favourite artists?
Yeah.
Well, that's... This is a very big question, and I'm going to actually pass this to Alan to start with, so that I can think about it. So, yeah, Alan, come on. Who were your major influences? Pick up your microphone. Microphone?
I'm doing it again. Yeah. My main influence in illustration, artists I still admire to this day, Frank Frazetta, which I think most of you are probably aware of. I don't think he's been beaten. Villaggio, people say, oh, yeah, Villaggio can do this better than Frazetta, but I don't think he can. You can see Frazetta in Villaggio's work. You never see it the other way around. He was the influence, and when he painted a woman, you know, she's got flesh. You know, it's a real woman. If it's a monster, a reptile, dinosaur, it really looks reptilian. There's something the way he captures it. Muscles on Conan the Barbarian, or on his war horses, whatever he painted, he depicted it very, very skillfully. And he had his influences too. Painters like, oh, crikey, what's his name? Who did Hal Foster, Prince Valiant? And somebody St. John, do you remember him? He's a generation ago, but he did Edgar Rice Burroughs, somebody St. John, J. Allen St. John.
And what about Don Lawrence as well? Remember the Trigon Empire?
I liked Don Lawrence's stuff, but you know, talking about Frazetta, no, I think Frazetta was the king. He's talking about favourites. I loved Don Lawrence stuff, and I also like Ronald Embleton's. In America, Gene Colan, I loved the way he depicted, well, movement, exaggerated perspective, this kind of thing. He's a real master. Jack Kirby's imagination was maverick. No, absolutely maverick. When he painted an alien ruin or whatever it was, he somehow went there. You know, I think his figurative work wasn't as strong, as perfect, say, as Conan's, but he was a real master. There's no getting away from it. He's a maverick imagination. Of the old greats, if you're talking about the old masters, one of my favorites is Francisco de Goya, because of his disasters of war and capriccios, that type of thing. He was a wonderful artist. And, well, Turner, of course, atmospheric studies, that kind of thing. But no, I've had my say. Let Duncan go.
Ditto. There's loads of artists, you know, you can get inspired with at different times in your life. I mean, all the classics, you know, Da Vinci, Degas, all of those, you know, people are fantastic artists. Lautrec, I loved when I was growing up. I was mesmerized with his work and everything like that. But I grew up in comic books, you know, like some of the, like Stan Lee's comic books, and you're talking about Frazetta and everything like that. They were brilliant. They were like, wow. And the first time you see real, you know, heroes come to life, the kind of things you would imagine in your head, but you couldn't quite, you know, draw down. And then when you saw them, you know, making a picture and creating a real, when you looked at it, it was something you could go into. And and that was kind of like a mixture of old masters as well for me. You can see the influence coming from them. There's just loads of people I can like Norman Rockwell. I love Norman Rockwell's work.
Yeah,
I just love the whole hometown thing, but the detail he went to and the humour he put into it and the time he spent, using friends, getting people to pose for him, and really, I mean, he worked really hard. I mean, I was amazed when I was reading about when he was doing his sketches, he would do everything in charcoal straight away. He'd finish the whole painting in charcoal, and then he would go and paint it from start again. And it was like, wow, the time that must have taken. But when you look at the paintings, you see how worthwhile it was, Tons of folk, I always wanted to be like Norman Rockwell, create something and put a bit of fun into it, put a bit of life into it, and stuff like that. And I'm still trying to do that. But there's loads of people. Your work's fantastic.
John,
I'll collect the money later.
John, how much time have we got left?
5 minutes?
About 5 minutes.
Okay.
Oh,
So that's me.
how am I going to fit? How am I going to fit in all the rubbish I'm going to say in 5 minutes? Honestly. Well, yeah, my influences were obviously early on. Influences were comics. I used to collect like British comics and then obviously American horror comics as well. So I really liked the Warren magazines with their really beautiful artwork. And some of the other horror comics that were a bit more simple. I love the work of Alex Nino, for instance, who had a very stylized way of doing everything. But yeah, obviously then I found out who their influences were and looked up those people, and that was like the pulp artists, like Frank R. Paul, Elliot Dold, H.G. Wesso, and various others. And of course I was wowed by them as well. Old masters-wise, I think Gustave Doré was my go-to fellow. I really wanted to be able to draw like him, even though he was doing engravings and I was using a pen. But yeah, those are the sort of the people the tradition that I came from. I say about House of Hammer magazine. That had the likes of people like John Bolton. And his illustrations he did Dracula Prince of Darkness and the Shandor comic strip, and his work was beautiful. It was very similar in style to Bernie Wrightson, who I think we all pretty much love. But so that was the kind of where I wanted to do it. And of course the black and white work that we were doing for the Fighting Fantasy books meant that we were dealing with, black on white, and the paper they were using was a bit rubbish, and they couldn't handle tone and stuff. So we kind of had to draw on those influences, for our work to be printed properly.
Yeah, that's right.
Does everyone agree with that? Yeah.
Can I ask a question
Anyway,
as well?
we must be nearly the end of our time now, so I'm just going to wrap up. Is there one more question that we can take? All the time. I'm always sneaking little things into my pictures.
Whenever there's a bookcase in there somewhere, I usually put something on the bookcases, names of people and things like that, or something funny. But yeah. Yeah,
we had a little competition with Games Workshop as to who could get the most cheeky things in, and Pete Nifton managed a pair of buttocks, which was okay. I managed something much worse, but I'm not telling you where it is or in what picture. You'll just have to find that for yourself. But yeah, and obviously a lot of film, TV, comic references. And Martin McKenna was particularly keen on slipping Doctor Who references into his pictures, like the sarcophagus on the Mummy cover was actually the sarcophagus from Pyramids of Mars, which was straight off the VHS release cover. Only a Whovian would spot that.
There's another question up there, somewhere.
Is there any more questions? I think we're gonna have to wrap. Is it? We're at the end, John.
Just do this one
There's
last.
a question, Steve. How long to make a cover? How long does it take?
How long did it take to do a cover? Blimey. It's hard to say because there was a lot of toing and froing with covers. Sometimes you'd send them in and have them sent back. So it could drag out for a few weeks. But as I say, we had like mostly well, it's about a month to do the black and whites, and probably about a month to do the cover. So, it's we just try and squeeze that in that time. What about you guys?
The Eagle Times one that popped up on the screen there, that took about 7 or 8 days. But there wasn't too much messing around with it. You could go straight in. I did a pencil rough that was approved directly, and they said, yeah, go ahead. And as Duncan and I were saying, there's some things a lot quicker today. Because of the net, you can snap, take a photograph, a sketch, or the process of your painting and so on. Instant goes to the customer directly. But phoning up, that's another kettle of fish. Trying to contact an editor, not a chance. Yeah, those things have changed for the worse. But there's a lot of positives about the present. There's no doubt about that.
I think for most covers, I used to try and get them done in a week. Try and get the sketch approved really quickly. Because I like working fast to get things finished and do that. So I'd try to get a week to 10 days or something. And most of them were done fairly quickly. So, yeah. Any other questions before we round up? Yes? Sorry, could you say that?
What helped you improve your art the most?
Improve it? Having someone else touch it up for you. No, I think having someone you trust, to come over and look at it and go, what do you think? Because sometimes you get too close to the piece of work you're working on. You need to step back and really look at it. And you get so precious about something. It's good to have someone who you trust, who's another artist, who'll come along and go, yeah, it's great, but you've kind of missed this, you've messed it up, and that's not quite right there. So you can look at it again. So after about 10 minutes of swearing at them, going, no, it's perfect, it's perfect. You go, oh, right, you're right,
We were discussing this earlier. You said one of the things is life study. There's nothing wrong, nothing perverse about drawing from the nude.
Yeah,
because it's 3D.
Is a big thing.
You can draw. You see things differently when you're actually working on the spot from the model. You learn a heck of a lot more quickly. Yeah. So, if there's any prospective illustrators here among you, artists, then do life study. There's nothing wrong with it. You learn a heck of a lot. It's been done throughout the whole history of art.
I totally agree. Life drawing is the foundation of being able to draw. You got to draw what you see.
And keep a sketchbook every day. Draw every day.
Yeah.
And in a month's time, look back at that sketchbook, the very first page, and look how far you've come to the end page, and you'll see a difference. It's all about, it's not being gifted with able to draw art and things. It's about wanting to draw it and have the kind of rush of wanting to do that and practice it. Practice like anything else in life. You want to really do it, practice it. So
if anyone wants to ask us any more questions,
I think we're actually going to need to.
Yeah, come and see us over on the desk, and we'll be happy to rattle on for hours more.
Well, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to our artists, Alan Langford, Duncan Smith, and Tony Huff. As Tony said, obviously, I think you probably all know by now, they do have tables along the side on the way to the signing table. So, but yes, it's fantastic to have them here. So thank you for coming, all of you. ready to go.
I don't mind moving. I'll go.
Just right. Well, I know this is another big talk of the day that you've all been waiting for, as we can tell by the fact the room is packed out. So it really is only for me to introduce Mr. Steve Jackson.
Right, well, thanks for that reception. It's probably because you all are wondering what I've been doing for the last 30 odd years. Okay, but the new book is out. It's sold out, which is very flattering, really. Before I start talking about that, I thought you might be interested in the story behind this T-shirt, which I brought along specially because we have a Japanese contingent who actually can read these characters. When Ian and I were doing a publicity tour in Japan, in goodness knows when, it must have been 87 or something like that, we got talking about Japanese characters and what do they mean? And they said, oh, the different characters fit together like this. And would you like a T-shirt printing of your name in Japanese characters? Oh, yes, please. So anyway, we forgot about it, and soon after we got back to England, got a parcel in the post, and it had come from Japan, and what was inside? There were a couple of T-shirts, and I was told that one was Ian Livingstone, one was me. We didn't know which way round. So I've been walking around in this T-shirt, which may well say Ian Livingstone. I have no idea. I know we've got the answer, but okay. Why has Secrets of Salamonis come about? Why has it taken so long? Well, a number of reasons. You'll notice that the credits go to myself and John. John helped me out a lot with this, and he deserves a good credit for it. What would you say, John? Would you say what sort of percentage would we do of the...
Well, yeah, I suppose... should we take a seat, Steve, so you're not standing all the time, I think. Okay. Feel free to sit down. Yeah, Steve asked me to come in and help him with the book, but he'd come up with all of the ideas. So it was all his initial idea, and then it was just I helped out with elements of the book, should we say?
Yeah, elements of the book, and quite a significant input into it. Definitely. Unfortunately, I was diagnosed about 5 years ago as having Parkinson's, and this is why, this is one of the reasons it's taken me such a long time to get back to writing again. And after so many years, I really had to have a go at it. And when Fantasy Fest 4 was announced, I decided I've got to do it. We started off a little tentative to start off with who was doing what, but it all slotted into place at the end. Actually, I'm supposed to be showing you some pictures, aren't I? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just. Okay. What have we got? Oh, that is that T-shirt. Yeah. That is my games room behind there. It's quite a few games, but about half as many as Ian's got.
But what Steve's got that Ian hasn't got is a poker table in his games room as well.
Ah, yes. That's
not shown.
Something that I play quite a bit, poker. And whoops, what was that? Somebody else. Okay. Yeah. And it's got a little magic room as well. We're doing stand-up magic. Now, so what are we looking at there? We're looking at, I never thought, Ian's got this like a flow chart that he's mounted up, and it's really useful at events like this, that you can see the way his thought works. You know, this one goes to the ogre, and this one just this. It's all spread out. And I tried to do something like that, and I don't know why, but we got it looking like a globe, which I thought was quite nice for the flow chart. Can we move on? What have we got? Oh, these are yes, this is me in midstream here with all little pop-up notes with all the ideas on. Oh, I wonder what it said. You can read some of them. Some of them will have made it into the final mix. Some probably didn't. Probably a lot didn't. And what else have we got? What was he talking about with that?
Games that have been adapted onto Nintendo Switch.
Oh yeah, no, but I know what I was talking about. This was another Japanese incident actually, and it involved Nintendo. Must have been about, I don't know, about the same time. I had a letter from Nintendo Japan saying, would it be okay if 3 people came over and talked to you? And I said, yeah, that's okay. These 3 people arrived, and I'd been told that they were, Nintendo and senior Nintendo. Anyway, so the day came, they arrived. There were 4 of them, arrived on the doorstep. And they'd made apologies, but the Nintendo head bod, I couldn't make it. So that's okay. I'm sure one of you has got responsibility. And I let them in. I was waiting to hear what they were talking about in terms of business, but I let them in. They showed them round my house, and they were diligently going around all the rooms with video cameras like this. And I was thinking, what's going on here? And it came to they'd seen the house. They went back to the front door and off, goodbye. And I said, what was all that about? And I realized that it must have been somebody in Nintendo who was a Fighting Fantasy fan and was using the name or the senior position to get to see Steve Jackson at home. Couldn't believe it, but nothing ever came with Nintendo until recently, actually, because Nintendo, there is a version of Sorcery out for Nintendo Switch, which I haven't actually seen yet, but I hear it's pretty good. Has anybody come across it? Anybody tried it yet? Yeah. Is it good? Fantastic. I'll have to buy one then.
There's one more slide.
Yeah, what's the last? Oh, there they are. Well, actually, no, that's just a gratuitous picture of 4 Japanese people, as if they'd arrived on my doorstep. Now, well, that's my little slideshow. I'm sure you've all got lots of questions that you'd like me to answer, and John, of course.
I've got some pictures from the book. Shall I put that one up?
Yeah, why not?
Just bear with us for a second.
What's going on here? Huh? Oh, okay, you get all that.
So just in case, because the artist on Steve's new book is Tazio Bettin from Italy, and he couldn't be with us today, but we've got some of his artwork if you haven't seen Steve's book already. Well, as it's sold out, you probably all have. Yeah. But anyway. So just while we talk or while I ask questions, we'll have some pretty things to look at, or not so pretty, but fantastic things to look at. When Steve came to me with the book, he had loads of ideas, loads of documents, scenes written out, encounters that he wanted to include.
Completely chaotic, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was inspirational. But one of the things which we were keen to do was revisit some of Steve's greatest hits. So without giving too many spoilers away, there are references to Citadel of Chaos and Creature of Havoc and the Trolltooth Wars, I think.
Yeah. And there's one of them is, of course, your companion that you meet in the docks and do some travelling with is a chap called
Rusnik?
Rusnik Olsen. Rusnik Olsen. And if you're quick enough about it, it's Russ Nicholson. And the book is, well, got quite a few of these Easter egg things. So I hope you'll enjoy those. And we have some more pictures?
Yes. So,
Oh, yeah. That was a beaut.
so as you know, Ian is incredibly modest and doesn't like having his picture drawn into his books at all. So we thought Steve should be just as
Balance
modest.
it up, yeah, okay.
So without giving too much away, if you look at the one up here, if you've read the Troll-Tooth Wars, I think they're also mentioned in Creature of Havoc, but you have the Tukey War Griffins. So you actually get to meet the Tukey War Griffins in this book at last. So that is the galley keep up in the distance approaching. And all the continuity is fine. It's all fine.
What can I say?
So we've revisited some of the classic monsters from Steve's earlier book. You saw the Rhino Man, and as you may have noticed, he had his medallion with his number on, so you know where you might encounter him. And we've got the Toad Man, and then this is another visit to the Witch Women of Dree. So they're all brand new encounters, but it's sort of, like I say, familiar places.
Well, almost all new encounters. There's a little area that you can enter called Memory Lane. And when you enter Memory Lane, you find yourself starting off the Warlock of Firetop Mountain adventure. And it goes on for a few minutes, and you go back in again. But I don't know whether people would notice it or not, but why not stick it in anyway?
There is another Easter egg to find out with that, which I think we'll save for people to read, but about the... I don't want to say too much for the fun.
Okay.
There is something else about the Warlock section, anyway, which hardcore fans may recognise.
Mm.
And then, obviously, we had new
Y-shaped
creatures.
sticks. Oh, that's an interesting one. Somebody asked me about this. Y-shaped sticks in Warlock. And Ian said he didn't write it in, and I don't remember writing it in. I don't know where it came from. No, but we'll have to rewrite Warlock now with the pointed sticks in.
It's probably a typo that the editors didn't pick up or something. So obviously there's also new encounters, and Steve came up with a whole list of quests, because one of the ideas, again, without giving too much away, so many of the adventures you start off, you're an experienced adventurer / murder hobo. But in this adventure, it's meant to be you're leaving home for the first time and setting out on this quest to become an adventurer. So at one point, we did toy with it, making it actually Cheddar Darkmane, but it isn't, for various reasons. But the idea is this person travels from their home to Salamonis. I keep pronouncing it wrong, and I've done this the whole time.
You're getting me at it now.
So to kind of make their fortune, and so something that's never appeared in the book before is Amanor. It gets mentioned in the Troll-Tooth Wars and the other novels as it being kind of the prestige that a hero's trying to earn. And for the first time in this book, you do earn Amanor points, and it does make a difference to what happens later on.
It is. There are lots of skills like that come into it, aren't they?
Yeah, so Steve had a whole list of other special abilities which you can acquire through interesting means. So it's got quite a long time span, the adventure, without giving too much away. But when you are able enough, you can tackle these different quests. So one of the ones which Steve mentioned he'd written down was this cryptic hunt for the horn of the black unicorn. So
that was yours.
it's very start apportioning
I
blame.
wondered what a black unicorn was. Anyway.
So, but this is Tazio. I think it's obviously very hard to draw, and it's just black and white, whether it's black or not. But a fantastic illustration. And the other one here is the Ratapilla, which I think gets mentioned in the bio on Amazon. I know that some people thought, what on earth is that? But we won't spoil the surprises. But
no, it's all right.
But again, trying to, you can obviously see it's a caterpillar-like form with massive rat's teeth. But anyway.
How are we doing?
Oh, that's the last one. So I'll leave it on that.
Yeah. Well, I'll throw it open to the floor.
Yeah,
then,
absolutely.
I guess. Anybody got questions? Yes. Oh, we need somebody to do the questions.
We've got that.
Yeah, good.
James, the mic's up.
Hello. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Excellent. Should we go to you first then? How on earth are you supposed to do the Maze of Zagor without cheating?
As I said, this is a really tough adventure.
With patience and dedication, obviously.
Should we do another question? Any more
Another
questions?
question?
Oh, should we just, because I'm lazy. There you go.
Thank you very much. A question about sorcery, in which there is a wonderful symbiosis between text and art. Could you please describe briefly the way you worked with John Blanche during the design process?
Well, basically, when it got to John's hands, I'd already written the text, and so he had that to follow. He's also very, imaginative, so he was good on coming up with new looks. But I think John's big contribution was the 4 different books, the same art style through 4 different books, without it getting dull or boring or anything. I think that was fantastic. I don't know whether I've answered that question or not.
Okay, let's go to you.
Thank you. Just a question about the ideas going into the new book. How many of those go back a while, and how many of those are new? Did you come up with all new ideas, or did some of those go back to maybe even the 80s? Or
I try to avoid repetition. Having said that, when you do the first quarter of the Warlock's path, but yeah. What was the question again?
So it's how many new ideas was there, or were there ideas coming from the 80s? Is that right?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
how far back do the ideas go that went into the new book? Did you kind of rack your memory going back into things you might have thought about for earlier books you didn't use, or is it
Yes, all this stuff, yeah, like that. I mean, I never stopped writing down ideas, and when it came to about, I don't know, beginning of the year, I suppose, what would you see you started working on? Sometime around the beginning of the year. Then they got cemented. But I think the important thing to do was to keep it fresh, and not just...
Steve had certainly been, I think if you came to the last fest, he mentioned he'd already got ideas for new books. So certainly I remember some of them going back at least 3 years, but and being percolated through. Because one of the things I know Steve mentioned to me early on was whether to set it in Analand again, sort of the same world as sorcery, but decided instead to set it in Alancia, sort of go back to the roots with Warlock and things.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually. Why did... It was a debate at the time whether I'd set the adventure in Analand as an extension of sorcery, or in Alancia. And I went for Alancia, mainly for commercial reasons, I have to admit. You're more likely to sell more books in the Alancia, set in Alancia, than you are in Kakabad. I don't know whether it was a good idea or not, because I think that the sorcery fans are perhaps a little bit more fanatical. Well, fanatical is not the right word, but it's yeah.
I can answer this slightly because certainly there were lots of new ideas throughout the process. So while we were discussing it, what he wanted to include, and at occasions I'd be working on elements of the book, and then Steve would send me an email or give me a call and say, "John, I've got this idea for something else we could put in." So
Yeah.
he's always coming up with ideas. Amazing imagination.
Well, thank you.
Hello. You mentioned when we saw the picture of your board games collection that you also have a stage magic room in your house. What do you see as the connect? Do you feel that there's a link between performance magic and game books as art forms?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. I don't know. It's only doing card tricks. That's all. Not stage magic.
When Steve says it's only doing card tricks, there are elements in the game book, which are inspired by his love of magic and con tricks as well, isn't it? Not that I'm saying that Steve's a con artist, but an interest in them. So kind of like mini games within the adventure as well.
Yeah. There are a couple of puzzles and yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I have to say, while we're waiting for the next question, my children are very fortunate, whether they realise it or not. Because in the past, sometimes I've gone for meetings at Steve's house and they've come along, so I had to pick them up after school. So they've done their homework at a poker table, and Steve always shows them a magic trick. So.
Anything to keep them quiet.
Sorry. So I thought it was really interesting to see the process of how you plan the games. I was really surprised to see you're still using post-it notes and whiteboards. Did you not? Is there not a software solution that you found that you could use, or is it just much easier to kind of plan out?
Yeah, I found it more difficult to work with software because if it's on paper, you can dart around the whole paper at once, and when you're going through from page to page digitally, it's a bit more difficult to relocate.
I think also there's an element where writing a game book isn't like writing a novel. I mean, novelists will do similar things anyway with post-it notes, I know, and pieces of software, but the game design element, and particularly because there's a map, whether it's a physical map or just a map of events, having that visually in front of you. Certainly it's possibly because I started out writing fancy game books, but it's also how I work. So maybe it just shows we're long in the tooth. But,
we've been at it a long time.
It's part of the physical process, the act of creating a game book involves actually having some sort of physical product in front of you.
Yeah, I find so.
Anyone else? Yeah, should we go for you? Do you want to pass that along, please? Is that all right? Thank you very much. Yeah, keep on.
Thank you. Steve, I wondered if you could confirm or deny a story that I've heard. Hang on. Let me get started. Apparently, you saw a kid on a bus that was doing the 5-fingered bookmark, and it wound you up, so you made Starship Traveller insanely difficult. Is that correct?
Where do these stories come from? I have no idea. 5-fingered bookmark is definitely a part of fighting fantasy, of course. I don't know about being right on the bus.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
Hiya. We were talking earlier in a different panel about the experience of co-writing and what it's like and how different people co-write in different ways. And I was just wondering, how quickly did you two fall into a rhythm of being able to write with each other?
It wasn't difficult, really, was it?
No. The way Steve will break down a scene is he won't write the section numbers, so he'll have like scene 9 or something, and then you'll get 9A, 9B, 9C, so it branches within that section. And although I do write using individual numbers, I also break it down in a similar way.
Yeah.
So it's really flowcharting, flowcharting, and flowcharting. So we had an overall progression of how we wanted the story to go through 3 distinct phases. And then within that, you break it down into those scenes, and then you break down those individual scenes into the sections that you have to write.
Wow, do you?
Yes, we did.
No, John's right. I mean, I've always worked that way, doing the A's and breaking it down, whereas the other way of doing it, and I just have to say, it's probably is a better way of doing it, is allocating the numbers as they come up, because you do that, Ian does that as well.
Yeah, Ian does it where he'll randomly select numbers as he goes along. I do it where I write everything in sequence, and then I muddle them at the end, so then personally, that's how I like to do it, so I can fit in where the illustrations go, where puzzles go, and things like that.
Yeah.
Do you mind passing that down? Is that all right?
I think we'll come back down after this one. Thank you.
Probably need to.
Hi, Steve. One of the things I really like about your game books is that you experimented with different genres, which is quite unique to you. Were there any genres that you didn't get a chance to do that you would have liked to have done?
I think at the time it would have been something like pirates. I know pirates was... I was looking at the time for different genres, as you say, and fantasy one had been done, all the Alancia work, and sorcery. And I remember Ian saying once, there's only so many things you can do down a dungeon. So that's why one of the reasons why I tried to move outside. Science fiction was the obvious one, science fiction, fantasy. Superheroes, another one, horror. And I was thinking about it, probably the only one that I didn't touch was pirates, but then that got blood bones in the end, didn't it? So those are all covered. Whether or not it was the right thing to do, or just keep everything in Alancia, but I got a bit bored at that time, just doing fantasy, so I wanted to try different ones out.
That was still very much in evidence when we were talking about Steve's plans for this new book. It wasn't just wanting to repeat what you'd done before. This one, Secrets of Salamonis.
I was waiting for a book.
Panic then. Yeah. Was to have something that made it different from all the others. So it wasn't just repeating the same adventure, just changing, reskinning it, as we would say now. But,
some of them worked and some of them didn't. I think House of Hell worked particularly well. That is, apart from fantasy, that's everybody's choice. Superheroes, I think the book looked good. Really. And what else did we do?
Well, Starship Traveller was your Star Trek homage.
Yeah, that gets mixed votes, I think, from the audience, whether it's a good one or not. I mean.
And Creature of Havoc was the first one where you're actually the monster.
Oh, yeah, that was a little bit of what you might call inspiration, or suddenly thought, oh, we do it the other way around. It was probably to do with Lionhead, who Peter Molyneux was starting up a new game studio, and he was working on this game called Dungeon Keeper. I don't know whether any of you remember that, but Dungeon Keeper was unique in that normally fantasy adventure games, you get the heroes wandering around a dungeon and killing the bad guys. Well, this was from the point of view of the bad guys. All they want to do is sit around and count their gold and things, and all these pesky parties, raiding parties from the surface were coming down and annoying things. So I thought that was a brilliant idea, and that got turned into...
Do you have any more questions? I'm sure there's still loads if people have the opportunity.
Hello. This morning, Rhianna Pratchett revealed that she wasn't allowed to use the word sandwich. Do you have any other crazy rules, and who makes these rules? Are they written down anywhere?
No idea. I think it's probably the editorial people at
I'll take a bullet for that one.
But, yeah, that's right.
When we had the discussion about sandwiches, I thought, I'm sure much we've had that. And now people have said that, I keep thinking maybe there were some in some other books, but I just thought it seemed a bit weird to have something like a sandwich within. You could have like a hunk of bread and a piece of cheese, but obviously there's no Earl of sandwich. I wasn't that pedantic, but yeah. So I was really suggest we make it something else. Yes. No subways in Lancia anyway. Not those sort of subways.
Anyone else? Oh, I'm going up here. God, I'm going to be fit at the end of the day, aren't I?
What was the most challenging part of making this book?
Geez, making all the numbers fit together properly. That is a major exercise. It can take, well, maybe a couple of days even, isn't it? I know you had somebody who came in and did it.
Yeah, I have to give credit. I don't know if Victor is in the room. There he is. He's been fantastic, because not only has he been really helpful, but he's done exactly what he promised he would do, and he hadn't told anybody. So Victor actually play-tested both Steve and Ian's new books, because when you've been working on something, you're just too close to it to see where it might be wrong. When somebody comes at it fresh and doesn't have all that assumed knowledge that you've already got and really picks it apart, and his contribution was invaluable. So a big round of applause for Victor, please. I think one of the tricky things was knowing what to leave out as much as to what to put in, because like I say, Steve had so many ideas, and to make it all fit.
I found myself, when I was left to myself, before having any discipline imposed on the number of pages of text, before you have to make a decision, because I find that if you go read through a few paragraphs and you get one choice of where to go, well, they might as well all have been in the same paragraph. But if they were all in the same paragraph, then it would be horrendously long. Yeah.
But when Steve sent me some files to begin with, and I thought, I'll just print these out to go through them, not having checked the page count, and I stopped when it got about that thick. But there's plenty of inspirational material to work from, like I say. One more question, Steve? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Last question, please.
Okay. We'll do a sign.
There we go.
Hello there. Would you please give us the entire solution of the walk-through pass for sorcery number 4, Inkle? I'm stuck since 4 years. Please, please, please.
I think I'm right right in saying that there's something in the auction, isn't there, which might help somebody who's stuck at sorcery? So, well, there we go. So that's your answer. So I think it just remains for me to say, on behalf of all of us, congratulations to Steve on the publication of his first new game book in 36 As you can imagine, from what Steve's confided in the Fighting Fantasy family today, it's obviously a day like this is incredibly taxing. So I think, again, we need to give a huge thanks for him for all his hard work today. Yeah, more thanks. And I think we need a standing ovation, don't you? I know that a lot of people were possibly disappointed that Steve hadn't managed to sign for them yet. He's very, very kindly said that he's going to do a little bit more of a signing now, probably back at the bookshop, for as long as obviously he's happy to continue. But we will be back in here at 4 o'clock with Ian McCaig, visiting us direct from Vancouver Island in Canada. So I just need to say thank you, obviously, for coming to this talk, and thank you to all those people who've been watching on the live stream. We'll see you at the next one, maybe. Oh, sorry.